Good evening. I have something very controversial to say, and a case to make, an argument to put, and it's actually it's fantastic news, but it is very controversial. I should say that you're not going to believe a word I say. You're going to think I'm a lunatic, but that's okay. What I'm actually going to describe is part of a methodology. Anyway, it's a possible scenario or alternate scenario for something that has happened. Anyway, I will try and speed up a bit. I'm not sure, it's possible that you don't all yet realize that in fact the world is being fixed and saved and reorganized, re-engineered, and everything's going to be fantastic. We're going to have this groovy purple planet where people don't, kill each other and all that kind of stuff. Now, as an end result of that, basically skeletons have to come out of closets. And, you might have noticed recently these peculiar references to that seem to completely undermine the basis of theoretical physics, for example, just that small one there. And there's a whole bunch of other stuff. So the bottom line is, when this Brave New World kicks into gear, there's going to be a lot of naming and shaming. All skeletons have to come out of all closets. I mean, it's just the way it is. And frankly, once people see what the world's going to be like going forward, they're going to forget about a lot of that other stuff. As a result, of course, we've started to see documentaries and bits and pieces that are casting massive doubt over the moon landings and Vietnam and what else? There's loads of them. Frankly, JFK, MLK, First World War, Second World War. They're starting to hint that there's going to be some significant rewriting of history, with a lot of things on that list. And that's part of this process. All skeletons out in the open. So anything on that list that is actually true will have to be revealed. And as I've posted before, I'm simply, I have no idea which of these historical events I think are fake and which are actually going to be, shock the world. But what I'm going to tell you about today is what I believe is going to be a very pleasant surprise from that list to help balance out some of the less so pleasant stuff. And like I said, it is very controversial. Basically, it's 9/11. What I'm going to describe to you is a very specific, a scenario where indeed it was possible to fake 9/11. Now, I know that sounds crazy, but that's actually part of the methodology, is that if you can come up with a plausible set of circumstances, a scenario to fit any crime, then it has to be considered. And basically, unless you have a separate possible scenario that's overwhelmingly more convincing for whatever reason than the other one, then your case is not solved. So that's kind of what my job is to try and figure out scenarios. And so I'm going to try and speed this up. All I'm going to do is give you the basic bare bones of the other scenario. And I will kind of speed up a little bit. Hang on, let me just pause for a sec. Okay, here we go again. So I'm now going to describe, actually I'm going to describe the one, because that's again how this process, the mental process works, is that you're led with certain facts. Anyhow, the one fact, the one thing that I noticed recently that really triggered me on this and made me think that there's a very real possibility that this was true, was relating to Jon Stewart. And I don't know if you follow Jon Stewart, but he's been doing this big charity drive recently and making a big political fuss about it, about his fund for the first responders, the 9/11 first responders, about how all this money he's raising for the families of the 9/11 first responders. Sorry, families of the 9/11 first responders who were killed. Now, that might not sound odd to you, but there's clanging bells in my ears. That's it's utterly ludicrous. Charities and funds that are set up for the families of the victims of 9/11, not just first responders. So as soon as I heard that was really jarring, and basically that was about 2 months ago. So that kind of that made me reopen the file, if you will. So that's just to put this in context. Why it took me so long. I actually literally only put the final pieces in place this evening. Basically, I'm not going to explain the backstory because the backstory is extraordinary. But I mean, and you probably won't believe anything I say here. But I'm going on the record, and you will see what what we find out. And again, I have no proof that this happened, but it is a plausible alternative scenario. So basically, this all goes back to 20 years or whatever, and it was about fixing the world and dealing with terrorism, and obviously dealing with the Middle East and rogue states and Africa and all the problems in the world, which we needed to take care of. But I'd never, not until tonight, had I actually put the 9/11 actually into the agreed upon plan. But there's no doubt in my mind, well, it's certainly a plausible scenario. In fact, this is going to serve as my report as such, and we will see if I'm correct. But normally, when you get a plausible scenario that is as outrageous as this, what I'm about to tell you, and yet it is plausible, normally there's a reason for that, because impossible stuff like that doesn't happen. So anyway, I'm just going to throw some of the facts at you. Basically, I believe, you see, the motivation and what have you, I'm certainly not certain of, but I believe that what we decided, and by we, I suppose I'm talking about, the grown-ups, the heads of state from around the world, none of whom really ever wanted to have a world war again, and none of whom really liked what was going on in the Middle East and with terrorism and so on and so on. So we put together an agreement. We basically, even back then, before 9/11. And so in a nutshell, I'll just quickly say what 9/11 allowed us to do, and then get to the act itself. Basically, what 9/11 allowed us to do was it gave the terrorist world, supposedly, a massive victory. So, all that kind of activity was certainly satisfied for a while. Obviously, it stirred up horrible, it was a hideous tragedy. But it also allowed us to, we got the Patriot Act out of it. We basically were allowed to ignore the international rules of espionage and warfare and combat, rules of engagement. So we used that as the springboard to depose a bunch of governments and take care of a lot of other business that was perhaps a little less front page, in various other countries. But it allowed us to go in and swing a very heavy hammer, not just us, and in so doing, we that led all the way up to now. So now I'm certain that this plan has actually included that. So speed up. So basically, I think what we wanted was we probably regretted building the World Trade Center. So I think we kind of almost offered it up. I think we negotiated it with probably Middle East leaders or what have you, and said, look, let's get rid of that because that's a bit of a nightmare. Okay, I've got to speed this up. And it gets a lot more controversial. One of the other things you might have noticed is that, as I mentioned earlier, that the concept of theoretical physics is basically being debunked. Everything that, all that E equals MC squared stuff was complete bullshit. Big Bang, black holes, space-time continuum is all garbage. And they've started basically to hint about that. Now that has been a real problem for, we've known that we were going to have to somehow deal with that confession. We've known that for 40 years. We never had nuclear weapons. All that theory is complete crap. Now we knew that was going to be a very embarrassing revelation, but nonetheless, it was something that we were only going to, did only kind of fess up to relatively recently. Certainly, the fact that nuclear weapons were a fantasy, never did exist, is, you could call it you could call that fairly confidential, fairly sensitive information. Very few people were read into that shit. So what we did was we created a scenario. If you remember, what we're going to say is that the reason that there were several reasons that we decided to take down the World Trade Center, the towers ourselves. The main one, of course, is it was a part of a deal to, to give the Muslim extremists or the terrorists or what have you. It certainly gave them their victory, and that was kind of agreed. And as I said, it also gave us a bunch of tools to go and do a lot of other stuff. So how are we actually? When it comes out, another reason again, because the people that made the decision to actually knock down the trade centers ourselves very well didn't know that, probably won't have known that nukes were fake. Because if you remember, what is going to come out is that one of the tipping points for us to make that extraordinary decision was, in fact, that a terrorist organization had smuggled a nuke into New York City and was going to detonate it. And indeed, that was the rumor. A rumor can be started by me in 10 seconds, and a rumor like that will spread across the world, if you wanted to. So it's very, very easy to start a rumor like that. And of course, if some Washington Post journalist says, well, what do you mean? What evidence do you have that there's that someone smuggled a nuclear weapon? You can't very well turn around and say, well, we know they didn't because they don't exist. So that was probably a genuine concern. It was the rumor. So I think that will also be used as the justification for taking this extraordinary step. Okay, now more interestingly, how did they do it? It's actually remarkably simple. It's basically a magic trick. There were two towers, and I will make another video explaining the details of how I know and how I was specifically involved. If you remember the video, basically all we see is what's on TV. The two towers went down. Now, we were told that one of them, the first plane hit at about 9:15, and the second one hit about 9:15. Okay, that's fine. Now, the fact is that, we only saw, there were very few eyewitnesses. The eyewitnesses were the people in the streets of Manhattan. The rest of us just saw the edited footage on the TV. Now, here's the clever thing. It would be of course, nobody knew that we were doing this. This was top secret. So the people were on the streets. They were all going to work. However, nothing could be simpler than, when the early birds who get to the doors of either of the offices, they could simply be kept out of the building by saying, oh, no, just wait a minute, there's a fire alarm or something like that. My point being that the buildings were empty, and it was incredibly simple to do. So in other words, nobody gets let into either building. The buildings are empty. And again, people who had been turning up to go into the office, it's very easy to keep them out, to say, for whatever reason, oh, sorry, the building is going to be open for another half an hour or whatever. If you remember that a lot of the footage from the ground was of with all the people looking up and going, oh my God. The majority of that was of the second plane. The reason for that, of course, is because the first plane had already hit at 2:15, so there were still people down on the street, blah blah blah. I mean, the fact that you've got one just before 9 o'clock when most people get in the office, and the other just after it was very, very sneaky. I mean, in actual fact, they almost certainly did. We did crash the planes ourselves on autopilot. We flew them into the towers ourselves. I'm quite sure we had the towers already wired to collapse afterwards. We're going to get rid of these horrible capitalist monstrosities and do it in a way that would set up the geopolitical climate perfectly to get us to where we are about to be. The other bit of genius about it was that they had, all businessmen, all people, everyone around that time is likely to just be entering their office or offices in particular. They're after the business, the elites, the business like class type people, because they, of course, are the ones that carry the narrative. But everybody would have either been just walking through a foyer. How many times that was indeed my case, where you walk in the foyer and you see a plane go fly into a building, and you give it a quick, what's that? And then you go into your office, and then, or into your meeting in my case, and then 15 minutes in your meeting, someone comes in and says, oh, another one's hit. I mean, it's brilliantly constructed narrative. But the point to bear in mind is that, you know, we knew in doing it, we knew exactly when it was going to be done. We knew that we could have the buildings completely empty. We knew, I'm sure, that there would still be some, you know, crowds on the street. But again, they could have been herded out of the way. It was basically an extremely elaborate production, whereby we did indeed take down the World Trade Centers ourselves. And there were so many different other layers of the cooperative agreement. It was all about the surveillance that we could do subsequently in terms of, you know, what we could do under the new rules. And again, we could ignore, you know, the UN and all that kind of stuff. And we had the Patriot Act. We were setting the stage and the scene for resolving a massive number of issues. Just to give you some of the hints that never made sense regarding the 9/11. You know, we've been told that, you know, we knew that there were 3 planes missing from like an hour before, disappeared off the map, and everyone, you know, we heard all the ATC tapes. And then we heard that, you know, we thought that, you know, 1 or 2 of them might be heading towards New York, to the extent that they scrambled jets, and they were considering shooting these passenger liners out of the sky and slaughtering American citizens. Yeah, well, a call to the reception at the trade centers might have been a good idea, huh? If they thought that they were literally about to shoot these guys out of the sky, don't you think they would have had time to evacuate the World Trade Centers? Of course you did. That actually is one of the thoughts that just dropped into place tonight. And this is really how you can start to erode a so-called conventional wisdom, is by actually by identifying things that just couldn't possibly have been true. If your scenario involves things that simply would have been impossible, then your whole scenario goes out the window. That's actually how this kind of methodology works. So think about it. We had scrambled the jets. They were like buzzing around. We saw that. Eventually, we saw these jets. We knew they were like flying towards New York. Okay, it was chaos. It was a mess. There was all kinds of, you know, we knew that we thought, and nobody thought to evacuate the World Trade Centers, even though we'd been told that the Al Qaeda and, you know, obviously, you know, Bin Laden, they've been talking about, oh, they were going to fly planes into towers in New York. You know, think about it. Do you seriously think, given all the craziness going on in the sky, that they wouldn't have called the trade centers and evacuated them? So that is actually, you know, there's a million other things that now make far more sense, because, you know, don't forget that the very next morning we immediately painted the Saudis as the villain, because the only planes that were allowed to fly the next morning were to hurry the rich, corrupt Saudis back to Saudi Arabia after their meetings with the Halliburton crew and all this kind of crap. And of course, Bin Laden himself. I mean, you know, I would be very surprised if, in fact, Bin Laden doesn't turn out to have been working for us all along. I mean, I don't know all the details, obviously, but I am now, based on having explored this particular scenario, I personally am now very, very confident that we actually took down the World Trade Centers ourselves, and there were very few. I mean, I'm sure there were some casualties, but the 3,000 Americans that died that night, no, they didn't, and that's pretty good news. I'm probably going to do a separate video now, actually explaining a bit more about how I know, or no, but I know that this is a plausible scenario. It's outrageous, controversial. Everyone's going to think I'm a freaking idiot or a lunatic or both. That's fine. But it is my job to come up with actually plausible scenarios. And like I said, if you find a second scenario as outrageous as this to cover an event like this, it's very rarely a coincidence. So anyway, that's it for now. Thank you.